In a cold courtroom, Clara Ashford was a ghost. Her ex-husband, Graham, and his high-priced lawyer painted her as a penniless, desperate grifter. They mocked her worn-out clothes and her quiet plea for a fair settlement. To them, she was a pathetic obstacle, a nobody to be crushed on their way to his $90 million fortune. The judge was convinced. But what no one in that room knew was that Clara held a secret that wasn't just a will, but a $200 billion key to a global empire. They thought they were mocking a pauper. They were about to learn they had provoked a queen. The courtroom was a theater of quiet cruelty, and Clara Ashford was the unwilling star of the tragedy. The air, thick with the scent of old paper and stale coffee, felt heavy in her lungs. Every rustle of a legal pad, every hushed whisper from the gallery seemed to amplify her isolation. She sat at the respondents' table, her back ramrod straight, a posture she'd perfected over years of enduring quiet indignities. Her hands clasped tightly in her lap were the only betrayal of the storm raging within her. Across the polished wood divide sat Graham Calder, her ex-husband. He wasn't just a man. He was a monument to his own success, dressed in a bespoke suit that probably cost more than Clara's entire wardrobe for the past decade. Beside him, his lawyer, a shark named Victor Langston, exuded an aura of predatory confidence. They made a formidable pair, whispering to each other, and occasionally casting smug, dismissive glances her way. "Ms. Ashford, Mr." Langston began, his voice a silken weapon. "You are seeking 50% of Mr. Calder's assets accumulated during your 12-year marriage. Is that correct?" Clara's own lawyer, a young, earnest, but clearly outmatched public defender named Naomi Pierce, nodded for her to speak. Clara cleared her throat, the sound barely a whisper. "Yes, that is what the law provides." A ripple of condescending laughter came from Graham's side. Langston smirked. "The law provides for a fair and equitable distribution, Miss Ashford. What we are here to determine is what precisely you contributed to the accumulation of those assets." He let the word "contributed" hang in the air, dripping with insinuation. Graham had started his tech consulting firm, Calder Innovations, 7 years into their marriage. He'd always told Clara it was his venture, his genius. She had worked 2 jobs in those early years, a waitress by day and a cleaner by night, to keep their small apartment afloat while he chased his dream. She had typed his business proposals, made coffee for his late-night coding sessions, and been the silent, supportive bedrock upon which he built his empire. "I supported my husband," Clara said, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. "I ran our household, managed our finances when we had almost nothing, and worked to pay our bills so he could focus entirely on his company." Langston chuckled, a dry, dismissive sound. "You mean you did the chores, Miss Ashford, a commendable, if unremarkable, domestic duty. But Calder Innovations is now valued at over $90 million. You cannot seriously expect the court to believe that making pot roast and paying the electricity bill entitles you to $45 million. The gallery tittered. Graham leaned back in his chair, a look of vindicated pride on his face. He caught her eye and gave a slight pitying shake of his head, as if her claim was the most pathetic thing he had ever witnessed. That look was more painful than any of Langston's verbal jabs. It was the look of a man who had completely erased her from the story of their shared life. "Your Honor," Langston continued, turning to the bored-looking Judge Whitaker, "my client was the visionary. He worked 100-hour weeks. He secured the patents, courted the investors, and built the company from the ground up. Ms. Ashford, meanwhile, has no college degree, no professional skills to speak of. She was a homemaker, a perfectly respectable role, but not one that generates wealth of this magnitude." Naomi Pierce stood, her face flushed with indignation. "Objection. My client's non-monetary contributions were essential to Mr. Calder's success. The law recognizes this as marital partnership. Recognizes, yes, But let's be realistic about the scale, Langston retorted smoothly, not even waiting for the judge to rule. Let's look at your current circumstances, Miss Ashford. He picked up a document. You currently reside in a one-bedroom apartment on the south side. You work as a part-time librarian's assistant. Your annual income is, if I'm reading this correctly, just under $24,000. He paused for effect, letting the disparity sink in. Mr. Calder has graciously offered a one-time settlement of $250,000, a generous sum that would allow you to start over, perhaps even get some of that education you never pursued, yet you refused it. You are demanding a sum that is frankly ludicrous. It speaks not of a desire for fairness, but of pure, unadulterated greed. Clara felt her cheeks burn with a hot, shameful fire. He made her sound like a parasite, a common grifter. She looked at Graham, hoping to see a flicker of the man she had married, the man who had once whispered that they were a team, that her support meant everything. But his eyes were cold, distant. He was a stranger. Next to him sat his new fiancée, Sloane, a young, glamorous woman in a sharp white pantsuit. Her blonde hair perfect her expression, one of bored superiority. She'd occasionally whisper something in Graham's ear, and he would smile. They were a team now. Clara was just an obstacle to be cleared. "Ashford," Judge Whitaker said, his voice laced with impatience. "Mr. Langston makes a compelling point. The offer on the table seems more than fair, considering your limited involvement in the direct business operations. Are you sure you wish to proceed with this highly ambitious claim?" The judge's words were a clear signal. He had already made up his mind. She was the poor ex-wife trying to cash in. Her contributions were invisible, unquantifiable, and therefore worthless in the face of Graham's gleaming nine-figure net worth. The world seemed to shrink around her, the walls of the courtroom closing in. The weight of their collective judgment pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. They saw her as small, weak, and insignificant, a ghost of a life that Graham had already moved on from. She opened her mouth to speak to defend the 12 years she had poured into their marriage, but the words wouldn't come. Her throat was tight with unshed tears of rage and humiliation. In that moment, staring at the smug faces of Graham and his lawyer, Clara felt utterly and completely defeated. As the lunch recess was called, Clara practically fled the courtroom, the echoes of thinly veiled mockery following her down the marble hallway. She found a secluded wooden bench in a quiet corridor, the cold of the polished wood seeping through her thin blazer. She felt hollowed out, a shell of the woman she once was. All she wanted was what was fair, what she was owed for her years of sacrifice. But in their world of power and money, fairness was a commodity she couldn't afford. Naomi, her lawyer, found her a few minutes later holding 2 cups of lukewarm coffee from the courthouse vending machine. She sat beside Clara, her youthful optimism visibly dented. "Don't let them get to you, Clara," Naomi said, though her voice lacked conviction. "Langston is a bully. That's his strategy to make you feel worthless, so you'll take their low-ball offer." "It's working," Clara whispered, her voice. "Even the judge looks at me like I'm something he scraped off his shoe. We just need to prove your contribution. We need something concrete. Did you ever attend business meetings? Did you help him write the source code? Anything tangible?" Clara shook her head, a fresh wave of despair washing over her. "No, he always said I wouldn't understand it. He kept that part of his life separate. He said it was to protect me from the stress." She now understood that he wasn't protecting her. He was excluding her, methodically writing her out of their success story long before it was even written. As she sat there defeated, her mind drifted back, searching for a lifeline. She thought of her childhood, a past she rarely spoke of, She'd been raised in a series of foster homes, an orphan with no knowledge of her biological parents. Her file was thin, simply stating her mother had passed away in childbirth, and her father was unknown. It was a ruthless existence, one that had made her crave the stability she thought she'd found with Graham. Her hand went to a small, simple silver locket she always wore. It was the only thing she had from her past, found with her when she was left at the hospital as a baby. It was plain, unadorned, and worth nothing monetarily, but it was her only tangible link to a history she'd never known. She opened it, now a nervous habit. Inside was a tiny, faded, black-and-white photograph of a smiling young woman. Her mother, she assumed. On the other side, tucked behind the photo, was a minuscule folded piece of paper. It had been there for as long as she could remember. She'd looked at it 100 times over the years. It bore a single, elegantly written name, Reginald Hawthorne. The name meant nothing to her. She had tried searching for it years ago, but Reginald Hawthorne yielded thousands of results. It was a dead end, a forgotten ghost. It was just another mystery in a life defined by them. Just as she was about to close the locket, a man in an impeccably tailored gray suit paused at the end of the corridor. He wasn't a lawyer or a court official. He carried an expensive leather briefcase and moved with an air of quiet authority that was utterly out of place in the drab courthouse. He had been sitting in the back of the gallery all morning, observing the proceedings with an unnerving stillness. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, met Clara's for a fleeting second. There was no pity in his gaze, only a cool, calculating assessment. Then he turned and walked away. Clara thought nothing of it, dismissing him as just another spectator at the public spectacle of her life's unraveling. The afternoon session began, and it was even more brutal than the morning. Langston called a financial analyst to the stand who systematically dismantled any claim Clara might have to the company's growth, presenting charts and figures that painted her as a financial nonentity. So, in your expert opinion, Langston concluded, what was Ms. Ashford's direct financial contribution to the $90 million valuation of Calder Innovations? The analyst adjusted his glasses. "Zero," he said, the word echoing in the silent courtroom. "Her name does not appear on a single incorporation document, investment agreement, or patent filing. From a purely financial and legal standpoint, she was not involved." Graham couldn't suppress a small, triumphant smile. It was over. Clara knew it. Naomi knew it. The judge was already mentally drafting his ruling. Naomi rose for a final, desperate cross-examination. But a company isn't just documents and patents, is it? It's built by people. It requires time. Time that Mr. Calder had in abundance because my client was at home, creating an environment that allowed him to work without distraction. "A noble sentiment," the analyst said condescendingly, "but one that has no place on a balance sheet." Defeated, Naomi sat down. Judge Whitaker cleared his throat, ready to deliver his verdict. In light of the evidence presented, the court is inclined to. He was cut off by a sudden commotion at the back of the courtroom. The heavy oak doors swung open, and the man in the gray suit strode in. He wasn't alone. He was followed by two other individuals who looked more like corporate bodyguards than legal aides. "Your Honor, forgive the interruption," the man said, his voice calm but resonant, commanding immediate attention. "My name is Silas Everhart. I am senior counsel for Whitmore Legacy Group. I am here on a matter of extreme urgency that directly pertains to the respondent, Ms. Clara Ashford." A murmur swept through the courtroom. Whitmore Legacy Group wasn't just a company. It was a legendary multi-billion-dollar conglomerate with interests in every corner of the world. It was owned by the most elusive and powerful billionaire on the planet, A man so reclusive he hadn't been photographed in over 30 years, Reginald Hawthorne. Clara's heart stopped. She heard the name, and her blood ran cold. Reginald Hawthorne, the name from her locket. Judge Whittaker, visibly flustered by the unexpected and high-profile intrusion, stammered, "Mr. Everhart, this is a private divorce proceeding. I don't see what business Whitmore Legacy could possibly have here." Oh, Mr. Everhart's gaze was unyielding. He didn't look at the judge. He looked directly at Clara, a strange, almost reverent expression on his face. "On the contrary, Your Honor," he said, his voice ringing with authority, "we believe Ms. Ashford's true assets have been grossly, and I mean grossly, underestimated." Graham and Langston exchanged confused, irritated glances. What was this nonsense? Some kind of stunt? Langston stood up. "Objection, Your Honor. This is an outrageous interruption. This man has no standing here." Mr. Everhart simply raised an eyebrow. "Oh, I believe I do," he said, opening his briefcase. He pulled out a single thick document bound in leather. "I am here to execute the legally certified and recently updated last will and testament of my employer. You see, Mr. Reginald Hawthorne passed away peacefully in his sleep 48 hours ago." A collective gasp filled the room. The death of Reginald Hawthorne would be front-page news worldwide. And Mr. Everhart continued, his voice dropping slightly as he turned his piercing gaze fully on a stunned and trembling Clara. He named a sole beneficiary to his entire $200 billion estate, a person he has been searching for over 30 years, his only child, his daughter. He took a deliberate step forward, holding the document out. A woman known to this court as Clara Ashford, but known to us and to the world from this moment forward as Clara Elise Whitmore. The courtroom, which had been a low hum of whispers and rustling papers, fell into a silence so profound it was almost deafening. The only sound was the frantic beating of Clara's own heart, a wild drum against her ribs. Clara Elise Whitmore. The name was alien, a string of syllables that felt like they belonged to someone else, someone from a novel or a film. Yet the name on her locket, the secret she had carried her entire life, was Reginald Hawthorne. It couldn't be a coincidence. It was impossible. Graham's face was a mask of utter disbelief. His mouth hung slightly agape, his confident posture collapsing in on itself as if his spine had turned to jelly. His lawyer, Mr. Langston, looked equally thunderstruck, his sharp legal mind visibly struggling to process the seismic event that had just occurred. He looked from the imposing figure of Silas Everhart to Clara, then back again, as if trying to reconcile the image of the meek, penniless woman at the respondents' table with the name of the most powerful heirs on the planet. Judge Whittaker, for his part, looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. He stared at Mr. Everhart, then at the leather-bound will in his hand, his judicial authority completely usurped. "Mr. Everhart, are you certain this is highly irregular?" "I assure you, Your Honor, our certainty is absolute," Everhart replied coolly, his composure a stark contrast to the shockwaves rolling through the room. "We have spent decades and considerable resources searching for Ms. Whitmore. We have DNA confirmation birth records that were sealed by court order and a lifetime of correspondence from Mr. Whitmore to his lost daughter. The evidence is irrefutable." He placed the will on the clerk's desk with a soft, definitive thud. The last will and testament of Reginald Hawthorne. It names his daughter, Clara Elise Whitmore, born Clara Elise Ashford, as the sole inheritor of his estate, his properties, his companies, and his entire liquid fortune. The transfer of assets is already in motion. Clara felt dizzy, the world tilting on its axis. Her father. She had a father who had been searching for all her life. She had believed she was an unwanted footnote in someone else's story. Now she was the entire book. The weight of this revelation was crushing, exhilarating, and terrifying all at once. Her mind flashed back to every lonely birthday, every holiday spent with foster families, every moment she had ached for a connection to her past. It had been there all along, a $200 billion truth waiting to be discovered. It was Graham who broke the silence. He shot to his feet, his voice a choked, incredulous squeak. "This is insane. It's a trick. She's nobody. I was married to her for 12 years. She's a librarian's assistant, for God's sake. She doesn't know anything about anything." His panic was palpable. He wasn't just losing an argument. He was watching the entire foundation of his reality crumble. The woman he had dismissed as a simple-minded homemaker was suddenly the wealthiest person he had ever met by a factor of thousands. Mr. Langston, recovering his senses, quickly tried to spin the situation. "Your Honor, this changes nothing about the proceedings. This alleged inheritance occurred after their separation. It is not a marital asset. My client's offer of $250,000 still stands. It is, in fact, even more generous now, as Ms. Ashford clearly no longer needs it." He was trying to salvage the situation to frame it as a win, but his voice was strained, his usual smugness replaced by a desperate, frantic energy. Silas Everhart turned his head slowly to face Langston, a thin, humorless smile gracing his lips. "You misunderstand, Counselor. I am not here to discuss Ms. Whitmore's inheritance as it pertains to this divorce. I am here to discuss the assets that were already hers during the marriage." A new wave of confusion swept the room. "What are you talking about?" Graham demanded, his voice cracking. Everhart's eyes glinted with cold precision. While Mr. Whitmore was unable to locate his daughter for many years, he never stopped providing for her. On her 18th birthday, he established a blind trust in her name, the CEA Trust. He has been depositing funds into it on every birthday and every major holiday since. The trust was managed by our firm, with instructions to grow the capital until she was found. He paused, letting the information sink in. As of this morning, that blind trust, which legally belonged to Clara Ashford, now Whitmore throughout the entirety of her 12-year marriage to Mr. Calder, is valued at approximately $750 million. The sound Graham made was a strangled gasp. Langston's face went white as a sheet. $750 million, a marital asset, an asset that Clara had been completely unaware of, but which was legally hers. The implication was clear and devastating. According to the very laws of equitable distribution that Langston had been so smugly lecturing them on, Graham wasn't divorcing a poor librarian's assistant. He was divorcing a woman who for the last 12 years had been a multimillionaire, and he was legally entitled to none of it, while she was entitled to half of his $90 million company. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. Langston, the master of legal maneuvering, had just been checkmated by a ghost. "So you see, Counselor," Everhart continued, his voice dripping with ice, "we are not here to ask for more from Mr. Calder. In fact, we are here to make him an offer." He turned his gaze to Clara, who was still trying to process the enormity of what was happening. Her life was being rewritten, sentence by sentence, right before her eyes. "Ms. Whitmore," Everhart said, his tone softening with respect, "with your permission, we would like to formally withdraw your claim for 50% of Calder Innovations." Graham's eyes widened with a flicker of desperate hope. Was he off the hook? "And in its place," Everhart said, turning his lethal gaze back to Graham, "we will be filing a counterclaim. We will be demanding 50% of all marital assets. That includes Mr. Calder's $90 million company and, of course, Miss Whitmore's $750 million trust fund. We believe Mr. Calder's fair and equitable share of the total marital pot comes to approximately $420 million. We are prepared to write him a check today." The room erupted. Graham Calder, the man who had mocked his wife for being poor, had just been offered a payout that would make him one of the richest men in the city. But it wasn't a victory. It was the ultimate humiliation. His entire $90 million empire was now just a rounding error in his ex-wife's finances. He had spent the entire day trying to swindle her out of a fair settlement, only to find out he was the one who had been living in ignorance, a porpa married to a princess. Clara finally looked up, her eyes locking with Graham's. The fear, the confusion, the shame, it was all gone. In its place was a calm, quiet strength she hadn't felt in years. The power dynamic hadn't just shifted, it had been annihilated. She saw him for what he was, a small man made temporarily large by money, now utterly dwarfed by a power he couldn't comprehend. The unraveling of his lies was complete. The unraveling of her new life had just begun. The immediate aftermath in the courtroom was chaotic. Reporters who had been lazily covering what they assumed was a run-of-the-mill bitter divorce were now scrambling, their phones pressed to their ears as they barked the unbelievable headlines to their editors. The death of Reginald Hawthorne was a monumental story. The discovery of his secret A's in a provincial divorce court was the kind of sensational twist that would dominate the news cycle for weeks. Judge Whitaker, looking completely overwhelmed, hastily adjourned the proceedings for the day, citing the extraordinary and unforeseen circumstances. Graham was frozen in place, his face a ghastly shade of pale. His fiancée, Sloane, who had looked upon Clara with such disdain, was now staring at her with a mixture of awe and terror, as if Clara had suddenly sprouted wings and a halo. Sloane slowly began to edge her chair away from Graham, a silent, instinctual act of distancing herself from a man whose world had just imploded. Mr. Langston, usually so articulate and composed, was stammering, trying to lodge a series of incoherent objections that Mr. Everhart swatted away with effortless disdain. Your client is being offered $420 million. Counselor, I would advise him to accept it before Ms. Whitmore changes her mind. Clara was escorted from the courtroom by Everhart's security team, who moved with practiced efficiency, shielding her from the sudden barrage of flashing cameras and shouted questions. They led her not back to the drab corridor where she had wept just an hour before, but to a private chamber reserved for judges. Inside, Silas Everhart stood waiting. Miss Whitmore, he said, his voice now gentle, I know this is a great deal to process. We have a car waiting to take you wherever you need to go. We have also secured a suite for you at the Grand Majestic Hotel under a secure name. Clara sank into a plush leather chair, her legs finally giving way. My father, Reginald Hawthorne. Why didn't he? Why didn't I know? Everhart's professional demeanor softened, revealing a glimpse of the man who had served his employer loyally for decades. He tried, Clara. I promise you, he tried. He explained the story in brief, compassionate strokes. Her mother, Anneliese, was the love of Reginald's life, a brilliant art historian. They had kept their relationship private, away from the prying eyes of the world that followed a man of his stature. Anneliese had died from complications during childbirth. In his grief, Reginald had been betrayed. A distant, jealous relative entrusted with the baby's care while he made funeral arrangements had maliciously given the infant Clara over to the state system, telling Reginald that the child had also passed away. He believed you were gone for 5 years. Everhart said, his voice heavy with the weight of the old tragedy. It wasn't until the relative made a deathbed confession that Reginald learned the truth. You were alive, but you had been lost in the foster care system. Your name changed. He has been searching for you ever since. He poured billions into the search, hiring the best investigators in the world. But you had moved so many times, and records from that era were imperfect. We came close several times, but we were always a step behind. Tears streamed down Clara's face, not of sadness, but of a profound, earth-shattering sense of connection. She wasn't an accident or an inconvenience. She was loved. She had been sought after. "We finally found you 3 months ago," Everhart continued. "We confirmed it was you." Mr. Whitmore was overjoyed. He was planning how to approach you, how to explain everything. He didn't want to frighten you. He was terminally ill, Clara. He had been for some time. He was trying to hang on long enough to meet you in person. Everhart's voice broke slightly. "I'm so sorry." His greatest regret was that he ran out of time. Meanwhile, back in the now empty courtroom, Graham finally snapped out of his trance. The shock was wearing off, replaced by a curdling, venomous rage. She knew. He hissed to Langston, his voice low and dangerous. That whole act, the timid little librarian, the victim. She knew all along. She was playing me. "Graham, that's impossible," Langston reasoned, though he was sweating through his expensive shirt. "Everhart said they only found her 3 months ago. They hadn't even contacted her yet." She looked as shocked as we were. "Don't be naive." Graham spat, his face contorted. "This is a setup. This is her revenge, making me look like a fool, dangling that money in my face. $400 million. She wants me to take a handout from her." The humiliation was a poison in his veins. For 12 years he had been the provider, the genius, the one in control. He had built his identity on the foundation of his superiority over her. The revelation that she had been in secret wealthier and more powerful than him all along was an existential threat. It invalidated his entire life's narrative. "We fight this," Graham declared, his eyes wild. "I don't care what it takes. We challenge the will. We challenge the trust. We argue that she hid assets, fraud, something." Langston looked at his client as if he had lost his mind. "Graham, you have no grounds. We'd be laughed out of court. They have DNA evidence. They are Whitmore legacy. Their legal team could buy and sell our entire firm before breakfast. You were just offered a life-changing sum of money. Take the win." "It's not a win," Graham roared, slamming his fist on the table. "It's a disgrace. I built a $90 million company with my own 2 hands. I will not be reduced to a footnote in my ex-wife's charity case." His ego, a fragile and bloated thing, could not withstand the blow. He couldn't accept the reality that his success, which he had guarded so jealously, was now insignificant. The grudge was taking root, a dark and twisted thing. He wouldn't just take the money and walk away. He would try to tear her down. He couldn't stand the thought of Clara Ashford, the woman he had discarded, now looking down on him from an unimaginable height. He would prove she was unworthy. He would expose her as a fraud, even if it meant destroying himself in the process. His pride, the very thing that had driven him to success, was now leading him down a path of self-destruction. He had mocked her for her poverty. Now he would hate her for her wealth. The days that followed were a blur for Clara. She was no longer just Clara Ashford. She was a headline. The billionaire Cinderella, the secrets, the richest woman you've never heard of. Paparazzi were camped outside the Grand Majestic Hotel. Every news channel ran speculative profiles trying to piece together the life of the woman who had inherited the world. Silas Everhart and his team acted as an impenetrable shield. They handled the press, managed the logistics, and began the monumental task of walking Clara through the empire that was now hers. The scale of it was beyond comprehension. Whitmore Legacy wasn't just a company. It was a sovereign entity. It had divisions in technology, renewable energy, pharmaceuticals, and global shipping. It employed over 500,000 people worldwide. Clara sat in meetings in a sprawling penthouse suite that served as a temporary command center. Board members, division heads, and financial advisors, all powerful, intimidating figures in their own right, were flown in from around the globe to meet their new owner. They spoke in a language of acquisitions, market caps, and leveraged buyouts that was completely alien to her. She listened quietly, her face a mask of calm. But inside she was drowning. She felt like an imposter, a librarian's assistant, accidentally given the keys to a kingdom she didn't know how to rule. The weight of her new name, her new identity, felt heavier than any crown. One evening, after a grueling 12-hour day of financial briefings, Silas Everhart found her standing by the panoramic window, looking out at the glittering cityscape below. "It's a lot to take in," he said gently. "I feel like I'm going to break it." Clara confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "All of this, everything he built. I don't know the first thing about running a company, let alone this." He knew that. Everhart said Reginald wasn't a sentimentalist, Clara. He was a pragmatist. He didn't leave you his fortune because you were his daughter. He left it to you because he believed you had the character to wield it. Clara turned from the window, a skeptical look on her face. "What character?" "He didn't know me." "He knew more than you think," Everhart replied. He gestured to a large sealed crate in the corner of the room. "He left these for you, his personal effects from his private study." Later that night, alone, Clara finally opened the crate. Inside were not business files or trophies, but boxes of books, worn vinyl records, and photo albums. And on top of it all was a series of thick leather-bound journals. It was her father's handwriting. She opened the first one. It began 5 years after she was born, on the day he learned she was alive. "They told me my Clara was gone. Today I learned that was a lie. She's out there somewhere. I have a daughter, and I will not rest until I find her." Clara read for hours, tears blurring the pages. She read about his hopes for her, his fears. He wrote to her as if she were there with him. He detailed his business decisions, not in terms of profits and losses, but in terms of the world he wanted to build for her, a world he hoped she would one day inherit and make better. He wrote about his philosophy that true strength wasn't about aggression or ambition, but about integrity, empathy, and resilience. "Money is a tool, Clara," one entry read. "It can build or it can destroy. It reveals character. It does not create it. I have seen what greed does to men. They become hollow. I pray you never lose your heart, for it is a far greater treasure than anything I can ever leave you." Through his words, she finally met her father. He wasn't just a billionaire. He was a man of profound depth, intelligence, and love. And in his descriptions of the daughter he hoped to find, she began to see herself. He hadn't been looking for a CEO. He had been looking for a person of substance. He had trusted that the little girl lost to the world would grow into a woman of integrity. Meanwhile, Graham was making good on his threat. Fueled by a toxic mix of wounded pride and utter denial, he officially rejected the settlement offer. His lawyer, Mr. Langston, looking deeply uncomfortable, filed a motion to contest the validity of the CEA trust, claiming Claire had committed marital fraud by failing to disclose the asset. It was a ludicrous legal argument destined to fail, but its purpose wasn't to win in court. Its purpose was to harass, to delay, and to drag Clara's name through the mud. Graham gave a series of disastrous interviews to tabloid media painting Clara as a manipulative schemer. She played the long game. He claimed his face, a mask of faux sincerity. She pretended to be simple, to be content with nothing, all while sitting on a secret fortune. Our entire marriage was a lie. The public, initially sympathetic to the billionaire Cinderella, began to waver. The narrative Graham was spinning was insidious, and to some believable. Could someone truly be unaware of such a fortune? Clara watched one of the interviews on a tablet in her suite, her face impassive. A few days ago, his words would have shattered her. Now they felt like pebbles thrown against a fortress wall. She had spent 12 years being defined by him. She was done. She picked up the phone and called Silas Everhart. "Silas," she said, her voice clear and steady, "I'm ready. Schedule a full board meeting for tomorrow morning at the main headquarters." It's time I introduced myself. She wasn't just the heirs anymore. Reading her father's journals, she had found her purpose. She wasn't going to break his legacy. She was going to honor it. The crown was heavy, but her father had believed she was strong enough to wear it. It was time she started believing it too. And her first order of business would be dealing with the ghost of her past, Graham Calder. The Whitmore Legacy headquarters was a sleek, imposing tower of glass and steel that pierced the city skyline. It was a monument to power, a place where decisions were made that could alter the course of entire nations. As Clara stepped out of the armored sedan, flanked by her security team, she felt a tremor of her old insecurity. But then she straightened her shoulders, remembering her father's words. "Never let them see you doubt yourself, even when you do." She was dressed not in the couture gowns the media expected, but in a simple, elegant, dark gray business dress. It was a statement. She was not a socialite, not a celebrity. She was here to work. The boardroom was on the top floor, a cavernous space with a table that could seat 40. The entire executive board was assembled, a collection of the most brilliant and ruthless minds in the corporate world. They watched her with hawk-like intensity as she entered Silas Everhart by her side. They were assessing her, measuring her, wondering if the empire Reginald Hawthorne had built was now in the hands of a weak, unqualified amateur. Clara walked to the head of the table, to the chair that had been her father's. She didn't sit. She stood, her hands resting lightly on the back of the chair, and looked each board member in the eye. "Good morning," she began, her voice, calm and measured, amplified slightly by the room's hidden acoustics. "My name is Clara Whitmore. I know many of you have questions. You have dedicated your careers to this company, to my father. You are wondering about the future, about me." She paused, letting the silence settle. "I did not ask for this. I did not expect this. I am not my father. I do not have his experience or his singular genius. I will not pretend that I do. For the past 12 years, I was a wife, a homemaker, and a librarian's assistant. My life was small, and I was, for the most part, content with that." A few of the board members exchanged uneasy glances. This was not the confident, visionary speech they were hoping for. But in the last week, Clara continued, her voice gaining a new edge of steel. "I have been reading my father's journals. I have learned about the man. He was not just the titan of industry you knew. I have learned about his principles. He built this company not just to accumulate wealth, but to innovate, to solve problems, to build a better world. He believed in integrity. He despised bullies, and he trusted that I, his daughter, would carry on that legacy." She finally looked at them, all her gaze sweeping across the room, and "I will not fail him." Her tone shifted, becoming sharp and decisive. "Which brings me to my first official act as the owner of this company. It is a small matter of personal housekeeping, but one that I feel is necessary to address before we move forward." She nodded to an aide who dimmed the lights and turned on a large screen behind her. An image of Graham Calder's smirking face, taken from one of his tabloid interviews, filled the screen. "This is Graham Calder," Clara said, her voice devoid of emotion. "My ex-husband. As you may know, he has rejected a settlement of $420 million and has chosen instead to engage in a campaign of public harassment and baseless litigation against me and, by extension, this company." She clicked a remote. A new slide appeared detailing Calder Innovations, its market share, its key clients, its patents. Calder Innovations is a successful, if modest, tech consulting firm, Clara stated. However, their primary server contract, which accounts for 60% of their operational capacity, is with a subsidiary of ours. Furthermore, their largest client, the Sterling Reed Group, relies on a logistics network owned and operated by Whitmore Legacy Shipping, and their most valuable patent was developed using a foundational algorithm that, unknown to Mr. Calder, was licensed from a Whitmore Legacy tech incubator 10 years ago, a license that is up for renewal next month. The board members began to murmur. They were starting to understand Reginald Hawthorne's reach was so vast, it was almost impossible to do business in any sector without at some level doing business with him. Graham, in his arrogance, had no idea that the very foundations of his company were propped up by the empire of the woman he was trying to destroy. Mr. Calder believes he is an independent success story. Clara said, her voice now cold as ice. He is mistaken. He is a tenant in a house he believes he owns. And I, she paused, letting the words hang in the air, am the landlord. She turned off the screen. Silas, please inform our legal team of the following. Effective immediately, we are terminating the server contract with Calder Innovations, citing breach of a newly invoked partner ethics clause. Second, inform the Sterling Reed Group that due to a strategic realignment, their logistics costs through our network will be increasing by 300%, unless they choose to partner with one of our preferred tech consultants. Finally, inform Calder Innovations that their algorithm license will not be renewed. Silas Everhart simply nodded, a glimmer of deep respect in his eyes. The board was silent, stunned. With 3 sentences, Clara hadn't just attacked Graham's company. She had surgically and ruthlessly dismantled it. It would be bankrupt within 6 months. As for the divorce, she continued, we are withdrawing the $420 million offer. My original claim stands. I am entitled to 50% of his company. I will be taking my $45 million worth of shares. When the company collapses, those shares will be worthless, but I will have made my point. She looked around the boardroom again. The skepticism was gone, replaced by a mixture of shock, awe, and perhaps a little fear. They had expected a librarian. They had gotten a Whitmore. My father despised bullies. She repeated, her voice now soft, but carrying immense weight. He taught me through his words that power is not to be used for personal vengeance, but it must be used to protect what is yours and to decisively end threats. Mr. Calceder is a threat. Today, that threat has been ended. Now, she said, finally taking her seat at the head of the table, let's talk about the future of Whitmore Legacy's renewable energy division. She was the architect of her own consequences, now not the victim of them. She wasn't just wearing the crown, she was wielding the scepter. And the world was about to see what Clara Whitmore could truly do. The news of Calder Innovations' impending collapse hit the financial world like a tidal wave. It happened with breathtaking speed. The termination of the server contract was announced. First, a devastating blow that sent Graham's other clients into a panic. Then came the news of the logistics price hike, which caused his biggest client, Sterling Reed, to publicly severize within hours. The final nail in the coffin was the non-renewal of the algorithm license, rendering his company's core product obsolete. Graham was apoplectic. He was ruined. His $90 million company, the entire source of his pride and identity, had been reduced to ashes in less than 24 hours. He tried to fight back, screaming to the media about corporate sabotage and unfair practices. But no one was listening. He had picked a fight with Whitmore Legacy, and the outcome was as predictable as the sun rising in the east. He had been a fly swatting at a giant, and the giant had finally swatted back. His fiancée, Sloane, saw the writing on the wall. The glamorous life Graham had promised her had vanished. She was gone by the end of the week, leaving behind a brief note and an expensive engagement ring on the marble countertop of his now heavily mortgaged penthouse. Mr. Langston, his own reputation in tatters for advising Graham on such a suicidal course of action, formally withdrew from the case. Graham was left with a second-rate lawyer who advised him to take whatever he could get. The final court date was a stark contrast to the first. The room was packed not with bored spectators, but with serious financial journalists. Clara arrived quietly flanked by Silas Everhart. She wore a simple cream-colored dress, looking serene and composed. Graham was already there, a shrunken, haggarded version of his former self. His bespoke suit was wrinkled, his face was unshaven, and his eyes were filled with a defeated, hollow hatred. He stared at Clara, but there was no fire left in him, only the cold embers of his own arrogance. The proceedings were brief. Graham's new lawyer meekly accepted Clara's original claim, 50% of Calder Innovations' assets. The judge, now showing Clara an almost comical level of deference, swiftly approved the settlement. A financial analyst presented the company's current valuation. After the canceled contracts and loss of intellectual property, the company was drowning in debt. Its net value was negative $3 million. Clara's 50% share was a debt of $1.5 million. Her lawyer, a senior partner from Whitmore Legacy's legal team, this time stood. "Your Honor, my client, Miss Whitmore, in a show of good faith and a desire to close this chapter, has decided to graciously forgive Mr. Calder's half of the debt. It was the final, quietest, most devastating blow. She wasn't just taking his company. She was absolving him of the debt, an act of charity that underscored the infinite gulf that now lay between them. It was not an act of kindness, but a final dismissive gesture of power. She was writing him off, not just as a husband, but as a balance sheet entry." After the gavel fell, Clara stood and walked out of the courtroom without a single backward glance. Graham remained seated, a broken man left with nothing but the public humiliation of his own making. Clara didn't return to the penthouse suite at the hotel. Instead, she asked her driver to take her to a place she hadn't visited in years, the small, run-down public library where she used to work. She walked through the familiar aisles, the scent of old books, a comforting balm. She ran her fingers over the worn spines, remembering the quiet peace she had found in this place, a sanctuary from her unhappy marriage. She realized then that her old life hadn't been a weakness. Her quiet nature, her love of books, her ability to endure these were not flaws to be mocked. They were the source of her strength. It was in the quiet moments that her character had been forged, the character her father had trusted. Graham, with all his noise and bluster, was the weak one. His strength was borrowed from money and status. Hers was innate. Standing there among the stories of ages, Clara Whitmore, the secret A's, finally understood. She hadn't inherited a fortune. She had inherited a responsibility. Her victory wasn't in crushing Graham or in the billions of dollars now at her command. Her victory was in the quiet realization of her own worth. A worth that had been there all along, hidden in plain sight, waiting for her to finally claim it. Her new life wasn't about the money or the power. It was about honoring a father she had never met by becoming the woman he always believed she was. Clara Ashford's journey from a courtroom punching bag to a global powerhouse is a stunning story of karmic justice. It shows that true strength isn't about the noise you make. It's about the quiet character you build when no one is watching. Graham saw his wife as a worthless accessory, only to be defeated by the very integrity he lacked. Her victory wasn't just the money. It was the final quiet realization of her own worth. What did you think of Clara's final move? Was it perfect justice or cold, calculated revenge? Let us know in the comments. If you loved this story of hidden strength, please hit that like button, share it with a friend, and subscribe for more incredible dramas.